Hello, I'm Paul Lancaster, a rail enthusiast and the former manager of the town's local TV channel at Swindon Cable. Well, I'm now stood in Rodbourne Road looking back on an event that took place here, a very sad occasion 40 years ago, the closure of Swindon's GWR works. It was on the 26th of March 1986 that I joined a handful of people on the other side of the road and waited for the hooter at 4:30. It sounded for a long, full 5 minutes, marking the very end. And as the workforce streamed out of the gates for the very last time, the only real emotion they felt was one of absolute anger, disappointment that they'd been let down, that the rail works had reached the end of the line, and for them, what was supposed to have been a job for life was no more. Well, today I'm marking that sad occasion 40 years ago on the 26th of March 1986. After years of threats from government and a decline in UK heavy engineering, Swindon's once mighty and world-famous railway works had reached the very end of the line. The works transformed Swindon from a small market town with a population of 2,500 into one of the country's biggest bustling railway towns. In its heyday, 14,000 people were employed on this site, and the main locomotive workshop, the A-shop, was an incredible 11.25 acres, over 45,000 square metres, one of the largest covered areas in the world. It built the famous King George V locomotive and the very last steam locomotive built for British Railways, the Evening Star, back in 1960. That railworks closure back in 1986 was a bitter blow for Swindon, for the people that had helped to create a modern, thriving town.
When I started work in the railway works, 1920, there was 14,500 men worked in that works. When I left, it was down to 2,500. I feel shattered, to be honest about it. I mean, that's been my life. I worked on the railways at the time I completed my education, for what it's worth, and went into the railways 51 years. That was my whole working life, and I've had nothing else. When you think about the number of skills there were, and they were skilled, believe me. You know, you had the shitters and turners, coppersmiths, brass finishers, and brass moulders and iron moulders, blacksmiths. You had the lot, everything that you could think of. And to see it being destroyed as it is, and it hurts me very much. Because it was the finest railway works in the world.
Sad times indeed, and I remember 40 years ago being one of the very few people stood here in Rodbourne Road and waiting for that hooter to sound for the very last time. 4:30 on the 26th of March 1986. It sounded for 5 minutes. Like many people, I'd grown up to the sound of the hooter, having gone to school in Jennings Street, just a couple of streets away. It sounded in the morning, it sounded at lunchtime, and it sounded in the evening to tell the workers when to start, when to go to lunch, and when to finish their shifts. So that final blast on the 26th of March was very poignant indeed. Well, looking back through the archive, I've discovered some footage that hasn't been seen fully for 40 years. One of the many protests that took place in a bid to try and save Swindon's railway workshops. Here's the Mayor's chauffeur-driven Daimler arriving at the Rodbourne Road entrance to the railway works. This location today is roughly opposite the entrance to the Great Western Designer Outlet Village. The Mayor at the time, Councillor Percy Jeffries. These are the works' main gates where most of the deliveries were made. We then see the start of what was quite a lengthy procession streaming from the works entrance and making its way into town. Many of the rail workers and their families taking part in the procession alongside representatives of some of the major trade unions of the time. A reminder of the rich history when you see banners for the Boilermakers and Shipbuilders Union. 1985 was supposed to have been a year of celebration, marking 150 years of the Great Western Railway. But in light of the then threatened closure, it's not surprising that the workers pulled their support for the GWR 150 events. The Conservative government of the time was not a fan of the railways, and workshops such as Swindon, which was part of British Rail Engineering Limited, or BREL, it suffered a lack of support and investment. This was indeed a difficult time for many Swindonians, and it marked a town in transition, losing its traditional industry that for many families had provided employment for generations. At one time it was considered a job for life. Thousands of protesters streaming down Rodbourne Road, under the bridges towards the town, and an eventual rally in the GWR Park. We pick up the procession at the top of Commercial Road, just outside the old library. Back at the park, we caught up with the rail union leader, Ray Buckton, and his words of encouragement for Swindon's railway works.
If people in Swindon realise that if these works disappear, their livelihood can disappear and this can become a ghost town, I'm sure that people then will pressurise. It was pressurisation 151 years ago, it brought Saltpuddle Martyrs back. I'm a great believer in that, and people must get the message.
Do you think that the works can be retained as a unit under BREL, or do you think there's a possibility that it could survive after being sold off?
Well, I believe it could survive, but of course when they're taking the brunt of the attack against the trade unions and also the attack against anything which is public enterprise in this country, the government attack, it's obvious to me that they're in difficulties as long as this government's there, and there's no doubt at all about that. But we as train operators, and me representing the engine drivers, are greatly concerned these days about the deterioration in maintenance of rolling stock, locomotives and the P-way. Not because of the type of person that's looking after it, but because of the cutback in finance, and indeed the cutback of works like this where craftsmen are trained and brought into the railway world. We were world leaders, I believe we still could be, in railway workshops.
Quite a well-known figure from the 1980s, rail union boss Ray Buckton lending his support to the Save the Swindon Rail Works campaign. Well, the closure announcement did come. The local paper, the Evening Advertiser's headline that day, doomed. That final day 40 years ago, 26th of March 1986. The hooter sounded for a full, long 5 minutes. It sounded the death knell for Swindon Works, such an incredibly sad day for the workers. Although we lost the once mighty A-shop, part of the works have found a new use as a designer outlet village. Right next door, the Swindon connection with the railways is celebrated with a steam museum, housing many of the relics from the Golden Railway age and the Great Western Railway. The railway village, built to house the workforce employed at the railworks, is another reminder of our history and the Great Western Railway. Even the Milton Road baths are part of our rail heritage, being built as baths for the local workforce. Well, the Swindon legacy lives on and should be quite rightly and proudly celebrated. It's not right to dwell on the past, but we can't move on without celebrating those many accomplishments. You can't visit a preserved railway anywhere almost in this country without seeing the results of what was built here in the Swindon Railway Works. So let's celebrate that Swindon Railway connection, because the legacy lives on.